This will be video 2 for AP Euro for April 8th. Okay, from this point on, things move rapidly. The First Estate, although it included great cities like the Bishop of Paris, who were part of the nobility, also included those simple parish priests who saw themselves as having more in common with the members of the Third Estate. These parish priests voted to join the Third Estate and to meet as a national assembly. Rumors began to swirl that the king was preparing to take action against leading members of the Third Estate, and they also found that their meeting hall was closed off. In one of the famous scenes of the Revolution, members of the Third Estate gathered at the tennis court on the grounds of Versailles in what became known as the tennis court oath, promised to continue to meet until the Constitution granted a number of concessions, such as promising to periodically call the States General and to drop some of the more onerous taxes of the Third Estate. Just 1 year earlier, such acts would have been greatly welcomed, but at this point, the king's small concessions were too little too late. Finally, by June 27th, the desperate Louis XVI formally agreed to the consolidation of all three estates into a newly national assembly. Storm of the Bastille and the Great Fear. The implications from these momentous events would extend far beyond the confines of Versailles. Indeed, the revolution were about to see the first incident of violence. In Paris, panic began to set in as people continued to try to cope with the shortage of food that many blamed on the rapacious nobility and the acts of hoarders. The populace believed the rumors the king was not interested in meeting with the National Assembly and was instead organizing troops that would be used to scatter the National Assembly and to reestablish royal absolutism. This created a panic in Paris as people searched for weaponry to defend themselves against royal troops. There's an ongoing debate amongst historians as to whether the crowds that gathered around the Bastille, a fortress prison in Paris famous as a symbol of royal despotism because it had held critics of the monarchy, where they were spontaneously or whether they were organized by bourgeoisie elements. Regardless, the crowd of around 80,000 demanded the surrender of the fortress so they could confiscate the arms that they believed were inside. Although the rebels promised safe passage to the small garrison inside, the crowd eventually surrounded them, cut off the head of the commander of the troops, and marched around the city with the head on a spike. When Louis heard about the storming of the fortress, he asked, "Is this a revolt?" In response, he was told, "No, sir, it's a revolution." Once again, Louis quickly made concessions. He sent away some of the troops he had possibly planned to use to disperse the National Assembly. He formally recognized the Commune of Paris, the new municipal government that would come to play a pivotal role in later stages of the Revolution. He also agreed to the formation of the National Guard under the leadership of Marquis de Lafayette, who was already known as a champion of liberty because of his involvement in the American Revolution. In the countryside, things began to spiral out of control, just as rumors had spurred on the events in Paris. Rumors in the countryside brought about further changes to the direction of the revolution. For the peasants, the decade of 1780s had been a period of poor harvest. This, combined with a crushing tax burden, had resulted in resentful and fearful peasantry. A general panic set in known as the Great Fear, which consisted of rumors that the nobility was using the increasingly anarchical situation at both Versailles and in Paris to organize groups of thugs to steal from peasants. In response, peasants began to attack some of the great noble estates, carefully burning documents that verified some of their old manorial obligations. The Great Fear contributed to one of the most remarkable moments of the Revolution. On August 4th, 1789, the aristocrats in the National Assembly decided that the only way to halt the violence in the countryside was by renouncing their feudal rights. In a highly emotional scene, aristocrat after aristocrat stood up, some sincerely, others out of peer pressure, to renounce those rights that had made them a separate caste in French society. Peasants were no longer obligated to work on the local lord's land, nor were they barred from fishing in common streams or hunting in the forest, restrictions that the hungry peasantry found particularly onerous. As a result of the events of August 4th, all the people of France were subject to the same laws and obligations of society. So we're going to stop there and go look at the key concepts. What's happening now is that we're transitioning to Unit 5 of College Board's key concepts. So I want to wrap up Unit 3 and 4 to make sure we're not missing anything that wasn't covered in the packet. So I'm going to go back to Unit 3, kind of do a quick scan. I think most of it's been covered, so I'll kind of go through the topics real quick. So 3.2 is English Civil War, Glorious Revolution, we got that. 3.3 is the continuities and changes to economic practice and development. That's agricultural revolution changes, putting out system, transportation, transportation of agricultural products in the Americas. But be aware of the putting out system in the cottage industry, because I don't think the packets have covered that. Development of new market economy, the modern Europe, blah, blah, blah. Economic market development and mercantilism. We covered mercantilism and all that already. Dutch Golden Age, covered that. Balance of power. I don't think we ever covered this. The competitive system led to a new pattern of diplomacy and new forms of warfare. Following the Peace of Westphalia, religion declined as in importance as a cause of warfare among European states. The concept of balance of power played an important role in structuring diplomatic and military objectives. The inability of the Polish monarchy to consolidate its authority over the nobility led to Poland's partition by Prussia, Russia, Austria, and its disappearance off the map of Europe. After 1648, dynastic and state interests, along with Europe's expanding colonial empires, influenced the diplomacy of European states and frequently led to war. After the Austrian defeat of the Turks in 1683 at the Battle of Vienna, the Ottomans ceased their westward expansion. Louis XIV's nearly continuous wars, pursuing both dynastic and state interests, provoked a coalition of European powers opposing him. Advances in military technology led to new forms of warfare, including greater reliance on infantry, firearms, mobile cannon, and more elaborate fortifications, all financed by heavier taxation requiring a larger bureaucracy. New military technologies and techniques to institutions, tipped the balance of power towards states able to marshal sufficient resources for the new military environment. All right, 3.7, we got absolutist approaches. We got that. 3.8, comparison to absolutism to constitutionalism. That's a review for Unit 3, so we're good there. Unit 4, science and enlightenment. We got most of this. 4.2, we got science revolution. 4.3, we got the enlightenment. 4.4, 18th century society demographics. I'll read this real quick. I don't think we covered this. In the 17th century, small landholdings, low productivity, agricultural practices, poor transportation, and adverse weather limited and disrupted by food supply, causing periodic famines. By the 18th century, the balance between population and food supply stabilized, resulting in steady population growth. By the mid-18th century, higher agricultural productivity and improved transportation increased the food supply, allowing populations to grow and reducing the number of demographic crises, a process known as the agricultural revolution. In the 18th century, plague disappeared as a major epidemic disease, and inoculation reduced smallpox mortality. Although the rate of illegitimate births increased in the 18th century, population growth was limited by the European marriage pattern, and in some areas by various birth control methods. Infant and child mortality decreased, and commercial wealth increased. Families dedicated more space and resources to children and child rearing, as well as private life and comfort. Cities offered economic opportunities which attracted increasing migration from rural areas, transforming urban life and creating challenges for new urbanites and their families. The agricultural revolution produced more food using fewer workers. As a result, people migrated from rural areas to the cities in search of work. The growth of cities eroded traditional communal values. The city governments strained to provide protection in a healthy environment. The concentration of the poor in cities led to a greater awareness of poverty, crime, and prostitution and social problems, and prompted increased efforts to police marginal groups. 18th century culture and arts. Despite censorship, increasingly numerous and varied printed materials serving as a growing literate public and led to development of public opinion. Natural sciences, literature, popular culture increasingly exposed Europeans to representations of peoples outside of Europe and on occasion challenges to accept the social norms. The arts moved from the celebration of religious themes and royal power to an emphasis on private life and public good. Until 1750, Baroque art and music promoted religious feeling and was employed by monarchs to illustrate state power. 18th century art and literature increasingly reflected the outlook and values of commercial and bourgeoisie society. Neoclassicism expressed new Enlightenment ideals of citizenship and political participation. The consumer revolution of the 18th century was shaped by a new concern for privacy and encouraged the purchase of new goods for homes and created new venues for leisure activities. All right, 4.6, Enlightenment approach and other approaches to power. We covered that already. 4.7 is causation of the age of scientific revolution, which that's a review. We covered all that as well. So that's it. So tomorrow's video we'll go into Unit 5 more, and cover all that leading up to the French Revolution, because that's going to be part of that chapter. So anyway.